Welcome to City Cinematheque, where the art and pleasure of the movies are the subject of serious discussion. I'm your host, Jerry Carlson, and I teach film studies at the City College of the City University of New York. Today, we begin our tribute to classics of Ukrainian cinema. We'll be seeing the 1927 production, ZVENYHORA, directed by Alexander Dovzhenko. This is the first of three films that constitute what are known as his Ukrainian trilogy. Now, this is a very wild film, stylistically and also in terms of its many story registers. It's both historical, contemporary of the 1920s, and mythological. We'll be talking about that and its extraordinary artistic richness after today's screening. Joining us will be William Debnam, an expert on Ukrainian cinema from Columbia University. So please enjoy this rare opportunity to see a masterpiece of silent cinema from the Ukraine. Enjoy. Welcome back to City Cinematheque. I hope you've enjoyed this rare opportunity to see an early masterpiece from Ukrainian cinema. This is the first of three films that constitute, and that's the word, the Ukrainian trilogy of Alexander Dovzhenko. ZVENYHORA is a remarkable film in terms of its production, its style, and its attitude towards what the Ukraine is and what it means to be Ukrainian. We're here to talk about that today with a young expert on the Ukrainian cinema, William Debnam. William is an advanced graduate student at Columbia University, but he did his undergraduate work in his native UK, specializing in Ukrainian culture, literature, and cinema with a special emphasis on no less than Alexander Dovzhenko. Welcome to City Cinematheque, William.
Nice to be here.
Great. So let's start with, as the phrase goes, the man himself. This is a film made in 1927. It is almost 10 years after World War I and also after the Russian Revolution. So who is Dovzhenko in the Ukraine as a man, an artist, and a filmmaker in 1927?
Dovzhenko is a very interesting character, and at this time especially is in quite a sort of transition period of his life. He's just transitioned from being mainly a cartoonist, illustrator, and satirist in the new Ukrainian journals, to moving to Odessa and becoming part of this new cinematic project, largely kind of as part of this Ukrainianization project which was going on in the country at the time, whereby the national culture was to be encouraged over the kind of previously imposed Russian culture.
But at this point, just to make it clear for the audience, the Ukraine is officially a part of the Soviet Union.
It is officially a part of the Soviet Union, but in what is generally sort of has been subsumed by people as the Russian Revolution, what was going on in Ukraine and lots of the other national republics were more nationally motivated uprisings, which eventually were brought under the control then of the Bolsheviks. But because of this, the new Soviet Union really wanted to emphasize its difference from the former Russian Empire. And so there was this policy of indigenization, promotion of all of the national cultures of the various republics. And in Ukraine, this took the form of Ukrainianization. And so Dovzhenko moving to Odessa to become a director was part of this movement, because he is from a Ukrainian-speaking village background. He then went on to get an education from that, but he's very much part of the native Ukrainian culture, and so he was brought in to be a director at a time when at the Odessa Film Studios most of the directors previously had been of Russian origin. So he's new there, and it's a big change of career, and he's knocked out a few sort of less culturally significant films, but just sort of trying his hand. And so he's only been in the business for about a year.
Well, that's also one of the remarkable things about this particular period and what's happening, you know, sort of all over this newly constituted thing, the Soviet Union, is the relative, this window of opportunity of the relative youth of many of the people who become the arts practitioners. That Dovzhenko is not very old when this is no at all, and so he's getting big opportunities here. I mean, windows and doors are opening for him.
Yes, he's in his sort of mid to late 20s. I think he's about 26 or 27 at this point, and he's picked up various contacts, sort of along the way from his various careers previously as a diplomat, and then as an illustrator, and then as a title writer, actually, for the film studio before becoming a director. So he sort of immersed himself in this very new, nascent, Ukrainian revival, and everything is being learnt as you go, especially within the new medium of cinema. We're not, we are still in the early days, and so everything is really happening very spontaneously. Experimental things are being tried which haven't been tried before. So there's very much a kind of vitality and youth to this.
Right. And before we kind of move on to the film itself, I think you just pointed out something important, that he is a kind of Renaissance man, because and this strange, period in which, because of the revolution, there's this kind of openness for it's a window that's going to close, and that's going to be much of the rest of his life, is negotiating with that closing window. But he's accumulated an extraordinary range of experience for a man of that age, and now he's pouring all of that into becoming a Ukrainian filmmaker and making films that are, by his signature, importantly Ukrainian.
Yes, very much so. You've got the kind of early Ukrainian influences in his life of being from the village, from peasant stock, and from there, as we'll sort of see when we talk about the film, come a lot of the kind of folkloric and traditional Ukrainian elements. But he also, during his time as a diplomat, got to spend time in Poland and in Berlin, and so he was exposed to Western influences, American cinema, and he's sort of combining a lot of aspects, which was a thing that was possible at the time, as you say, due to the relative openness of Soviet Ukrainian society compared to what it then.
With the full arrival of Stalinization, which will come to bear on the productions he later makes, and which we'll be talking about in some other shows in this particular series. So this is a film that begins in a kind of mythical, non-specific past. I mean, it has certain characteristics of an era, and it even begins with these dreamy, slow motion images. So talk about his relationship to how you tell the Ukrainian past. What's the Ukrainian past?
Well, his vision of the Ukrainian past is very much one sort of inherited from Romanticism and from the Ukrainian national movement, of which he's been very much a part in the past. And this emphasis on, we open up with the Haidamaks, who are groups of Cossacks in the 17th century. Within this kind of romantic national view of Ukrainian history, the Cossacks have played a very important part, and they've been included and very much focused on in a lot of literature that we know Gogol was very much kind of consuming as a child and a young adult. Literature of Taras Shevchenko, for example, and of Gogol, who very much included these romantic representations of kind of Cossackdom. So I think as we open up and we have this sort of long shot, this slow motion, we're very much kind of getting a cinematic version of kind of an epic poem about the Cossacks, who are very much core to the Ukrainian imagination of itself.
Well, and so in that sense, this is a film that, begins by announcing its Ukrainianness that would be read as such by its audiences, because there's this, as you've just articulated, he's giving this cinematic rendering of a tradition that the audience is already familiar with through the literature, but through schooling about their own culture.
Yeah, definitely. No, he's appealing to this view of Ukrainian history, which has already been built up and isn't particularly inherently sort of filtered through a Marxist lens. We're kind of bringing along these centuries of what Ukrainian history has kind of characterized itself as. I think I might have said 17th century. I actually meant 18th. But yes, no,
we're a forgiving kind of show, okay?
But we've definitely we're presenting something which is familiar to at least to an educated Ukrainian audience, which many, of course, Ukrainians at the time weren't, but also through just the kind of folk tales and folk songs which are known by the less educated people. This is something which will be familiar to them, and actually you get an element of those songs and those poems in some of the intertitles in this. Right. In this section of the historical kind of historiosophical representation.
Well, and I think you also just brought up a very important point, that just as we talked about how there will be, many opportunities shut down by Stalinization and Russification in the coming years, one of those things is simply interpretations of history. That as we know, history is an interpretive act about reconstructing what the past was, and there are many interpretations and ways of putting together the past. And one of the things that is going to happen with Stalinization is that the Marxist version of the past will become the singular and only version of the past. Now, it's very interesting that this is a film that mixes different versions of the past. So let's go a little bit in the other direction, towards Dovzhenko and how he sees the potential of the present and how he interprets that for the Ukraine, because that's very much in the film as well.
It is, and this is something that's very interesting about Dovzhenko and about a lot of the artists at this time, is that Dovzhenko is here presenting the revolution and what followed the First World War, the revolutionary events. Dovzhenko was not a part of those events as a Bolshevik. He was part of those events as on behalf of the Ukrainian People's Republic, which was eventually overcome by the Bolsheviks. And he did not actually become a communist until he was captured, weapons in hand, very much like the grandfather, by the Bolsheviks. And so also one of the screenwriters of this, Tutunik, was from a very similar background in that regard. And so this presentation of the kind of conflict between Ukrainian nationalism and this kind of Bolshevism, it's very personal to Dovzhenko. And ultimately, in the film, we see that this version of history, the Ukrainian romantic version of history, is taken on board the allegorical train of Bolshevik progress, and we kind of see there can be a harmony there. But at the same time, there are lots of kind of ambiguities and kind of questionings of which path should we take, and certainly to people watching it, that's a question which is very much on their mind.
No, I think it's an excellent point about the fact that the film actually presents multiple versions, and as you've pointed out, its notion is not one canceling the other, although that was being proposed by any number of people, but rather its view is inclusivity, with certain things being dominant, but that doesn't mean rejecting or erasing certain other aspects. So this particular kind of Ukrainian nationalism, the distinctiveness of its culture, can be brought in and can live with Soviet Ukrainian modernity as it moves forward.
Yes. And that was one of the changes that happened, actually. I believe in an earlier version of the script, as Dovzhenko changed it from the original written by Tutunik and Johansson. In one of his versions, the grandfather is run over by the train. So in that version, we would see this kind of romanticized version of Ukrainian history giving up to the Bolsheviks. The ending that was included is a lot more, I think, in tandem with the idea of a Ukrainianized Soviet state which kind of accepts its various national histories that are contained within it. But I do think it's interesting that up until the point that he's pulled up onto the train, the Ukrainian historical elements and the elements of Tymish, the communist grandson, they run fairly separately.
Yeah.
And so there is this kind of ambiguity where you're thinking, is this an appropriation or is this a natural continuation? And so I think, and one of the complaints about ZVENYHORA at the time from some critics was that it doesn't present a clear enough political message. And I think to some extent that's true, that Dovzhenko does leave open a variety of kind of possibilities in people's minds with these kind of ambiguities and ambivalences.
Well, let's talk about this. This is the film that, I think, in just in a fascinating and rich way, you can say literally goes all over the map. I mean, it goes all through the Ukraine and its different points of history, the difference between the contemporary rural, the contemporary industrialized. We have the scenes in Western Europe, as well. So let's talk a little bit about the characters that drive all of this, because we have the grandfather and the two grandsons. So quite a grandfather, because he seems to, he's a little bit old. Let's just put it that way. Yes. He's a little bit old, and that. So why this grandfather figure? How do you think he functions within?
Well, throughout his early years, Dovzhenko kind of developed this idea of the grandfather, or just the old man, as a what he called a prism of time.
Oh, what a great phrase.
Yeah, no, it's a great phrase. And he was recorded as saying to his mother, actually, don't you know, Mum, these grandfathers represent history. And so that's very much what he's doing with the grandfather. In this film he's representing a kind of continuity of Ukrainian history, where he's present at various major events and is looking after the legacy of Ukraine, which is kind of represented by all this imagery of treasure. Right. Which is a very significant image in a lot of Ukrainian culture, this kind of buried treasure. You see that a lot in, again, Shevchenko's poetry and lots of other sources. So he's very much representing the Ukrainian past and kind of the fullness of Ukrainian history. Yeah.
Well, let's stick with that idea of the question, in a certain sense, of what is the treasure of the Ukraine, because there's a way in which it's defined very, very simply in terms of an adventure story and buried treasure, and the desire for that, and that one of the grandsons, that is his quest to find this, led by his grandfather. And yes, that's woven through the entire film, but the film also has very other ideas about the treasure of the Ukraine. What do you think about that?
Yeah, we've got this idea of, with the Roxana myth, we've got this idea that it is literally the kind of gold that was left after the invaders took tribute and all of that. But within the new Soviet interpretation, kind of encapsulated in the character of Tymish, we have the idea of actually the Ukrainian land and Ukrainian resources as kind of a treasure that can be harnessed for an industrial revolution, new industrial revolution in Soviet Ukraine. And he sort of, Dovzhenko represents this in these montages where you have coal being mined, and then that coal being used to make steel, steel to make tractors, and tractors to then plough the earth. And so it all sort of comes full circle back to that kind of Ukrainian rurality, but in a new modern context. And it's implied that this kind of scientific view of things is the true treasure of ZVENYHORA. But again, I think that's left up for some degree of interpretation. I think you can also take it metaphorically, as it has been in lots of other Ukrainian media, to simply kind of refer to the very idea of Ukrainian national identity and all of that. So there is some room for interpretation, but yeah, in the modern context, we kind of get this idea of treasure subsumed into industrial progress.
Right, and of course, we've already mentioned this, but it's worth coming back to. We have the final scene is on the train track, and again, the train is a very important image of modernity and of not only of the materials it's made out of, steel, but the way in which it networks lines of production, supply, modernity, growth. And what's so interesting to me is we have these the mythological past. We have the peasant woman. We have Roxana, and then we have this striking image when he's brought on the train of there is the modern Ukrainian young couple that are in the idealized sense, but they are very modern. And we see the woman who is being maternal and helping the old man, but she is very much a modern woman of the 1920s who can fit in. And so we're peasant dress is gone because you don't have to reject that, but you can be part of this new form of modernity that is being created in your country.
Yeah, definitely. You definitely see the kind of it doesn't have to be this or that,
right?
And we can embrace everything. It is a very quick sequence. As I said, it's interesting to see it doesn't develop over a long time, and we do get this within this same very short scene. We get this conflict of the grandfather objecting to this. This fiery dragon or whatever it is, and crossing himself and trying to stop it. But then we do see that ultimately this synthesis of all of these identities, which may seem contradictory, but are, at the time, the Soviet project is very much trying to integrate them. Perhaps it proves too difficult, and then eventually they give up in reality in the 30s. But that's very much part of this milieu of Ukrainian national in form, socialist in content.
Right.
Culture. Yeah.
Right. And the other thing about this film I think might strike a first-time viewers is, one, obviously none of these characters are developed in the kind of psychological sense in which we're used to a lot of characters, because they are allegorical characters. They're all about history and culture. But it's also true in the film that there's a great deal of the film that's really not interested in characters at all, and that's part of Dovzhenko, the poet of the Ukraine, because he's very interested in places, senses of different time, and an intense sense of what today is and can be. And we have all these sequences that are of process, in some way, and particularly when his fascination with what the Ukraine can be through modernization. And we spend a lot of time not with any of the characters, but with process itself.
Yes, and that, as you say, that's very much the dominant mode in kind of the scenes of modernity is these processes of transformation, as opposed to in the historical and kind of mythical scenes, possibly a more kind of slowed down and more kind of contemplative aspect almost, especially if we think about the scene with Oksana and her garland on the evening of Ivana Kupala, which is a Slavic, it's pagan and Christian sort of combined festival. What we're focusing on there is these recognizable archetypes, this woman waiting for her fate to come, and this setting which has been included in Gogol's work, for example, on the St. John's Eve. We're dealing a lot in sort of these archetypal representations rather than fully developed characters.
Great. You know, we're going to have to end on that particular note of observation about some of the distinctiveness of this film. There'll be, in the coming weeks, going to be seeing you know, more of Dovzhenko's work. If you are interested in what we're doing here on City Cinematheque, please dial in, tune in every week, and also you can find out about it on the website of City University Television. Go to www.tv.cuny.edu. There you're going to find the schedule of City Cinematheque, but also all the other programming on City University Television, CUNY TV. So visit www.tv.cuny.edu. William, I want to thank you for an absolutely fascinating discussion, bringing a breadth and depth of expertise about this film and sharing it with us today. I look forward to any possibility of us chatting again in the future, but thanks for today.
I look forward to that as well. Thank you for having me.
Great. And I want to thank you for being here today, and I want to ask you to come back and join us again on City Cinematheque when we continue our stroll through the archives of film history. But for now, it's goodbye.